go to the last part of sexual reproduction. The first type we saw was syngamy, and the second type is conjugation. In conjugation, the two parent cells or the two parent individuals, the organisms, they come together and they fuse. After fusion, there is exchange of the male pronuclei. The male pronuclei, after they are exchanged, there is formation of synkaryon. This synkaryon later on goes on to form the new individual. Before the formation of the new individual begins, the two parents separate. So here the fusion of the two parents is temporarily. So in conjugation, the two parents fuse temporarily. They exchange the male pronuclei. After that, the synkaryon is formed. Then the parents separate, and each synkaryon will then form a new individual. For example, paramecium. This process or this mode of reproduction can be seen in paramecium. So this was the end of types of sexual reproduction. Now we go to events which take place in sexual reproduction. So the first event is gametogenesis and gamete transfer. In gametogenesis, haploid gametes are being formed. So the gametes which are being formed are haploid. Once the gametes fuse, the zygote which will be formed will always be diploid. This we will see in the next step. Before that, the cells which go on to form the gamete are either haploid or diploid, but the gamete which will be formed will always be haploid. Now these gametes can be of two types. If the gametes are morphologically similar to each other, they are called as isogametes. And if both gametes are morphologically dissimilar to each other, they are called as hetero gametes. When the reproduction involves hetero gametes, the male gamete is called the sperm or the enterozoid. And the female gamete is called the egg or the ovum. So that was about gametogenesis. Coming next to gamete transfer. Usually, the male gamete or the sperm or the enterozoid are motile, and the female gametes are non-motile. For the male gamete to move and reach the female gamete, usually a medium of transfer is required. For example, water. In bryophytes and pteridophytes and algae, water is the medium which is used for transfer of male gametes. The male gametes which are produced are usually large in number because it is very less number of male gametes which are able to reach the female gamete. Now we saw that in bryophytes, pteridophytes and algae, water was the medium. And when we talk of unisexual animals, there for the transfer of male gamete, usually an organ is present. So that was about gamete transfer. Coming to second step or the second event, it is fertilization. Now during fertilization, the male and the female gamete fuse together. So the male gamete is haploid The female gamete is haploid, the zygote which is formed is diploid. So the zygote always is diploid. Zygote formed as a result of sexual reproduction is always diploid. Now this fertilization can be either internal or external. Now external fertilization is when the fusion of the gametes is taking place outside the body of the organism. This is seen in most of the terrestrial animals, the birds, the mammals, insects, reptiles. Also, this is seen in almost all bryophytes, pteridophytes, angiosperms and gymnosperms. And when we talk of internal fertilization here, the fusion of the gametes is occurring inside the body of the individual. Now in the first event we saw gametogenesis and gamete transfer. These both events occurred pre-fertilization, that is, they occurred before the gametes fused. Now we see what happens when the gametes fuse, that is fertilization. Now fertilization is of two types, external fertilization and internal. External fertilization is when the fusion of the gametes takes place outside the body of the organism. Here, usually fertilization is in an aquatic medium. For example, amphibians, fishes. So this was external fertilization. In internal fertilization, the fusion of the male and the female gamete is taking place inside the body of the female organism. Example, mammals, birds, almost all the bryophytes, pteridophytes, angiosperms and gymnosperms. Here the male gametes which are produced will be more in number, and the female gamete, that is the eggs will be less in number. This was the second event. Now coming to the third event, that is embryogenesis. Now this embryogenesis is occurring after fertilization, so it is a post-fertilization event. Before embryogenesis, or I could say the embryogenesis, first step would be development of zygote. Once the fertilization has taken place here, a diploid zygote is formed. Zygote which has been formed as a result of sexual reproduction is always diploid. Now this zygote will develop further and form embryo. The development of the zygote will depend on the type of life cycle of the organism and the environment of the organism. So these are the two factors on which the development of the zygote is dependent. For development of the embryo, once the zygote multiplies, forms many cells, and the embryo starts forming, once the zygote starts multiplying, that is, after formation, the zygote undergoes mitosis. So a mass of cells is formed. This is embryogenesis. Once these mass of cells are formed, they then undergo cell differentiation. What is meant by cell differentiation? There is a mass of cells which has been formed. These will then undergo modifications so as to form specialized tissues. these specialized tissues will then form organs and then further the organ system. So we have seen three events, main events of sexual reproduction. First is pre-fertilization, that was gametogenesis and gamete transfer. Second is fertilization, and third, post-fertilization event, which included development of zygote and formation of the embryo. Next, on the basis of type of reproduction, the animals can be divided into three types. First is oviparous. Oviparous organisms are egg-laying organisms. Here the egg is laid outside the body of the organism after fertilization. This is usually covered by a hard calcareous shell. The eggs have hard calcareous shell. And after a certain incubation period, the eggs hatch and a new individual is formed. These are oviparous. Second type are viviparous. In viviparous organisms, the fertilized egg develops into the zygote, which undergoes further development inside the body of the individual. So after fertilization, the zygote will then form the embryo. Embryo will then form a new individual, and then this individual is delivered outside the body of the organism. Now, since there is presence of placenta, which is the nourishing tissue in viviparous organisms, the chances of survival of the new individual from the viviparous organisms are high. The chances of survival of the viviparous are high because of presence of placenta. Third are ovoviviparous. Now in ovoviviparous, the fertilized egg is retained inside the body of the female. It develops into an individual inside the body, but there is no placenta. Since there is no placenta, there is not much nourishment for the new individual. So these were the three types of animals based on whether oviparous, viviparous or ovoviviparous.